Before I introduce our panelists, I wanted to just begin by setting the scene a bit as to why we're here to talk about this subject. So conflict-driven hunger has been on the rise globally since 2015, in part then due to the Arab Spring, but there's been masses of other factors in different parts of the world. There's now over at least 280 million people facing acute food insecurity globally, and the vast majority of them live in conflict-affected countries. The rise has been particularly pronounced in recent months because of the conflicts in Sudan and, of course, in Israel and Gaza. Conflict contributes to hunger in many different ways, and it's not just those communities that are immediately caught up in the front line of the violence who are affected, but people across a wide, much broader region can be deeply affected by the fact that conflict-affected countries typically see huge problems with supply chains of food coming into the country, which causes steep price rises. They also deal with the effects of currency depreciation that typically goes on too. So people in huge areas can be suddenly affected by their own money being worth less and prices soaring. And then you also have the more proximate causes of conflict-driven hunger. So that means things like the mining of agricultural land, looting of agricultural goods and livestock. It can mean the blocking of humanitarian access, so that organisations like Action Against Hunger sometimes can't reach those communities that most need the support of additional nutrition, food services and cash programmes. And then you also have issues with targeting of infrastructure in urban areas, and we've seen that most recently in Gaza. Very often the incidents are actually violations of international humanitarian law, but increasingly we're seeing conflict parties operate with some disregard for that law, which means that at Action Against Hunger, a key priority for our advocacy and that of many of our partner organisations is really trying to work with governments to promote upholding of international law in conflict. But besides that, we also, it's a key focus of our programming. So in 2023, Action Against Hunger was operating in 56 countries globally, including all of those most affected by conflict-driven hunger. We've reached over 20 million people, including 650,000 children with acute malnutrition, and reaching nearly 7 million people with water and sanitation services. Besides that, we've also provided mental health support to over 400,000 people, which is particularly key for those affected by conflict. So all of this, of course, crucially depends on our donors, and in particular, we need and value the most kind of flexible funding that our donors often provide, which enables us to respond quickly and flexibly in crises. But anyway, that's kind of enough of an introduction from my side on the topic. I think we'll learn a lot more about it from our speakers. So I'm going to begin by quickly introducing them, and then I will have an opening question from them all. So our first speaker today is Lord Johnny Oates, who is also the Chief Executive of United Against Malnutrition and Hunger. So we'll be hearing from him about his what inspired him to set up this group and his role in Parliament, and as well as his having visited Action Against Hunger programmes. Then our second speaker is Martine Villeneuve, who is Action Against Hunger's country director in Haiti, and we'll be hearing from her about her extensive experience from working in countries including Congo, Liberia and Somalia as well. Then our third speaker is Saleh Saeed, who is the Chief Executive of the Disasters Emergency Committee, and he has overseen the launch of 13 national appeals that have raised over £900 million for crises globally. And then finally, our final speaker is Hueti Haile Selassie, who is a new trustee for Action Against Hunger, and she brings really extensive experience from working in broadcasting and journalism, including over 15 years at the BBC World Service. So I'm going to begin with a question for each of you to answer in turn, which is what inspired you, your interest in international development? And I'm going to come to Johnny first.
Well, what inspired me was 40 years ago, watching Michael Burke's broadcast on BBC TV from Tigray in Ethiopia, which had an impact on me, which really changed my life. had a huge impact on many other people. And of course, Bob Geldof was one of them who set up Band-Aid, etc. But it just underlined to me that it was absolutely wrong that in a world where there was a lot of plenty, there were people who didn't have access to the food they needed. And I realized that politics had something to do with it. And that's when I first got motivated and involved in international development and in politics particularly. And that is, I suppose, that was when I was 14, 15 years old. And I suppose that has led to the role that I have now as Chief Executive of United Against Malnutrition and Hunger, but also the political roles I was involved with in the past. I'm very pleased to be able to be part of a government that had reached the 0.7% target, which sadly we no longer have with us. But it was really that very powerful broadcast. What the good news is, a lot has happened since there, which was positive. But we are in real danger of slipping back. So I'm always motivated. There's always more to do. So, but that's where my inspiration came from.
Thank you, Johnny. Yes, and it's great that we have your work with the coalition as well, or the alliance, to try to get it back up the political agenda. Martine.
Thank you very much. Well, I think it was always there for me, the interest to work to fight hunger, but also injustice. I was raised in a family that was very concerned about politics, injustice, and conflict. I was very concerned about, since I'm young, I was very concerned about conflict all around the world, and to understand as well how the hoping to survive in such context. So to me, I think I study a little bit of law, I study history, I study management and international development. This was always for me to enter this context and to go to war zone. So unfortunately, now my profile of an experience of war zone is matching the context in Haiti, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you, Martine. And Saleh, can I come to you next?
Yes, of course. So for me, it was a bit of a personal journey in that my family and I migrated to the UK when I was just a young boy from Yemen, and I had the opportunity to travel quite regularly to Yemen and see sort of windows of development of that country, both good and bad, and that obviously piqued my interest both in terms of that heritage, if you like, but also living and growing up in an area which also suffered its own disadvantages here in the UK in terms of that sort of inner city area, not far from Birmingham. Mm-hmm. I was fortunate enough to, after graduating, to volunteer for Islamic Relief, which is also a DEC member. And I instantly just fell in love with the work and the opportunities that presented to me, both to put to my skills to use, but also my passion in terms of helping others. It was just incredible. And I feel very fortunate to have been able to spend many years in the sector. And that's also led me to my role currently at the Disasters Emergency Committee. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Saleh. Yeah, it's very interesting how for all of you, it was something that really began in youth. And Hueti.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I have to say that Lord Johnny Oates has slightly stolen my thunder there, because I too was deeply moved by the broadcast of the Ethiopia famine in 82, 83. I was a very small child at the time, and my family is from Ethiopia, and my father is from the region not far from where those broadcasts came from. So that drew me into wanting to be involved, and that was always a sort of theme throughout my life, but also drew me into my work at the BBC World Service, which was always about telling the stories of those people and trying to tell them in as human way as possible. So all those things have kind of led to my deep interest in international development, and throughout my travels in Ethiopia and across I've always wondered what can be done, how can it be done better, and where could I potentially be of use. So those reasons.
Thank you very much, Wetty. It'd be great to hear more from you about those people that you've met on those travels when we come to you later. Great. Okay. Well, I'm going to come to our first brief Q&A session with one of our speakers. So we're going to be starting with Lord Johnny Oates. So, Johnny, can I begin by asking you about what inspired you to set up the United Against Malnutrition and Hunger Alliance?
Thanks, Kate. The real catalyst was the cuts to the aid budget a few years ago. And as you'll know, they led to disproportionate cuts in the global nutrition budget. And that came at the worst possible time, given the disruptions of COVID, of later the Ukraine war, and the ongoing problems of climate change. And we really felt that we'd gone from a period where in the UK, there was government that was not just committed on development, but was specifically committed on tackling issues around malnutrition and hunger, and that had slipped away. And we felt that there was a role for an organisation which was not a programme organisation, but an organisation that could bring together people from a range of different backgrounds, from science, from research, ex-military, ex-diplomats, faith communities, etc., to kind of raise their voices and put pressure for change, and to get the UK government back on track as playing a key role in tackling global hunger and malnutrition. So that was really our purpose. And one of the things about not having to raise funds beyond just our running costs, which are not too high, is we can ensure that we are able to amplify and collaborate with a whole range of organisations, yourselves at Action Against Hunger, but UNICEF, Save the Children, etc., and really to show a united voice in Parliament and elsewhere on this subject.
Thank you. Yes, and it's a really valuable role. And of course, as part of that work, you've been visiting some of the affected countries, and of course, most recently, you've been to Ethiopia. So, can you update us on, following your interest all those decades ago, what the situation is like there now?
Yeah, well, things have changed immensely. I in fact went to Ethiopia in 1985. It's a longer story than we've probably got time for on this broadcast, but when I was 15, I was there. The country has changed immeasurably since then, immeasurably for the better. And if you look at some of the data around under fives mortality, which is more than halved. You look around stunting, which has reduced very significantly, wasting, etc. There's been great progress made. But one of the things that I was learning about when I was talking with your colleagues at Action Against Hunger in Ethiopia, but also with UNICEF and other partners, was that despite that huge progress, there is a real danger of a lot of this going into reverse. Many of you will be aware of the conflict that has taken place in Ethiopia, and that is an ongoing armed conflict in some parts, which is obviously making it very challenging for organisations like Action Against Hunger and UNICEF to reach the people they need, but they're doing an amazing job doing so. And the system of health extension workers, which was a real a fantastic achievement by Ethiopia. There's a real danger because of this conflict, but also because of the disruptions of COVID, and that's less effective than it has been. And on top of that, you've got all the challenges of climate. So there is there's a lot of challenges out there, but the work that is being done is so important. It is so important that organisations like Action Against Hunger, which understand how to operate in areas where where there's conflict, etc., are there on the ground. And I noted when we were talking with your colleagues that 1985 was when Action Against Hunger started its role in Ethiopia. So it started at that incredibly challenging time. It has been part of the huge successes achieved, but we can really see the challenges that mean those efforts need to be redoubled by all the INGOs, but also by the international community as a whole.
Thank you. Yes, and it's good to be reminded that there has, of course, been progress, because, of course, it can also feel very a bleak picture at times. And following your meetings with country staff there, and also I know you've met some of our programme colleagues before, is there anything you can say on the areas of Action Against Hunger's work that have particularly resonated with you?
Sure. And first of all, just to pick up that point you made at the end, I think particularly in this year, which is the 40th anniversary of that broadcast by Michael Burke and the world hearing about the situation in Ethiopia, it's really important that we don't get into that mindset of, oh, nothing's changed. Huge things have changed. Huge progress has been made. We've shown what can be done when country governments and their partners work together with NGOs, and so we must hang on to that. We must make that point all the time. But just in terms of what I've seen of Action Against Hunger's work, I mean, the thing that's very important to me about what you do is your focus on hunger and malnutrition, because that does seem to me really so foundational to so many of the issues of development that have to be dealt with. But one thing in particular, I think you've done a great role at, and I've been in a number of your events, highlighting the impacts of conflict, and you set out, Kate, some of those in your introduction. But there is this vicious cycle of conflict causing hunger, hunger feeding conflict, and it's something that I think politicians really need to understand. So I think your focus on it's really important. In fact, this morning we helped organise a letter from former defence and development secretaries across parties in the UK to say, look, there's an absolute human tragedy going on here as a result of conflict-driven hunger, but it also has a real geopolitical significance that political audiences need to wake up to. So I think that work that you do highlighting that is so important when we see what's going around the world at the moment.
Thank you very much, Johnny. Yes, it's great to hear your support for our advocacy efforts on that front, and also wonderful that you're taking those sorts of initiatives as well in Parliament. That's a really valuable contribution with the election coming up. Fantastic. Okay, well, hopefully we'll be able to come back to Johnny later in the Q&A session. But for now, I will move on to our next speaker, Martine, who's our country director in Haiti. And I wondered if we could just start with an update from you, Martine, on what the situation is like there right now.
Yes, thank you very much. So as I said at the beginning, so the context in Haiti has changed quite a lot since the past years. So since January, the violence has raised quite a lot in the capital city, in Port-au-Prince. We are talking about 145 people newly displaced from the capital and in the capital area just because of the violence. This is almost half of the total of the displaced person in the country. The number is around 362,000 persons. So, and I apologize for my English, I'm a Francophone, so I have to just say at the beginning. So we are very concerned about that because there is an increase, not that much. So it means that people are displaced several times. The context is particularly worrying in the capital. People say that the capital is controlled, 80% of the capital is controlled by gangs, but I would say that 100% of the capital is controlled by gangs. It's just that 80% is living on the context of violence. So right now we have, well, you may have seen the murder of the two missionaries with their colleague, their Haitian colleagues, in part of the city. The violence continue to happen. 2 days ago, it was an attack against the police and the civilians in the city of Grésier that is next to Port-au-Prince. So the gangs are there and it continues. This is very destabilizing for the hunger situation. There is something that is very important to understand, is that in 2016, before the cyclone, there was no hunger crisis in Haiti. And after the cyclone, the crisis started. So we had a few people. After the assassination of the President Juvenal in 2021, the number of people living in a hunger crisis raised to 1 million. Right now, we are talking about half of the population of the country living in a crisis situation. 1.6 are in emergency situation requiring immediate assistance to curb the famine. The situation is mainly due because of violence. Of course, there is structural problem, but violence is the main issue. We can talk about climate change and the cyclones that are more frequent and stronger, and the rain as well that are changing. The rainy season is changing. But without the violence, we think that the population would be able to cope with that. Haiti at one point was able to sustain itself in terms of food, and this has changed drastically in the last 20 years, should we say. So it is very worrying. Maybe one thing that is also important, because we talked about the work we are doing in nutrition, 1 child on 4 is living with a chronic malnutrition situation in Haiti. We can change here. So yeah,
Martina, we may have slight connection issues. Although, you're back now, I think, properly. Great. Just lost you for a second. Thank you very much for that update. Yeah, that's things have been chronically quite bad there for many years now, and it's not a positive picture. Can you tell us a bit about what Action Against Hunger does differently in Haiti, and also in other contexts where you've worked, what you think is distinctive about our response?
So yes, so as I said, the context has changed. So the programming of Action Against Hunger is also changing in Haiti. So we try to respond at the same time to humanitarian and development issues. So some people will call it the nexus. You may have heard that word elsewhere. So we really try to build on our nutrition expertise. We still need to have funding to be able to reach our ambition on what we can do. But so we try actually to accumulate the protection response together with the nutrition response. There is a lot of needs in terms of protection of civilians. So the families that are living with protection issues often adopt negative coping mechanisms, and those negative coping mechanisms will be affecting their capacities in the future to take simply to survive. So the protection cases of today are the nutrition cases of tomorrow. So the fact that our team works together with the family, within the family, through family family dialogues, it helps to identify both the protection cases and nutrition cases. So we are able to work on both issues at the same time. One thing that we try to put in place with other NGOs, it's the rapid response mechanisms. It's something that is in place in other countries where we have a violent situation. It's a mechanisms where we can deploy very quickly to do an assessment of the needs and then start the response immediately. So it is still not in the of the humanitarian response here of approach, but is highly needed. So I would say that right now is slightly different in Haiti than other places because it's not a conflict. It is not recognized as a conflict, which means that the international humanitarian law does not apply. It's the local laws that are applying and also international human rights law. So, but that doesn't change that we need to negotiate our access. We need to take all the precaution as well to be able to operate safely, and that we are all exposed to the conflict that is ongoing. We are tracking, of course, the change and also all the dialogue and reflection that are happening about would this qualify as an international, a non-international armed conflict. So we are following the debate, but for now, I think we need to realize that the gangs are expanding their territory, probably in reaction of the deployment of the force. So we need to be able also to expand our capacities of humanitarian response. And I say that for all the humanitarian actors present in Haiti, the humanitarian response is underfunded.
Yes, and thank you. Yeah, it's a good reminder that, of course, the situation in Haiti has very distinct kind of features of it, that it isn't any other parallels with other conflicts around the world. Just finally, with your extensive experience of working in a wide range of different emergency situations around the world, can you comment a bit on how the response has to vary between them?
So it's a context. Well, it's a very interesting context from a point of view from my experience, because we are really at the beginning of putting in place all the mechanisms for the humanitarian response. So it means that the cluster are very recent. The cluster system was just put in place following the L3 level that was put in place by the UN. So this was in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. So some UN agencies have scaled up. OCHA has well established. We now have a regular humanitarian country team meeting. We are looking as well at well, as I said, about how the human rights law is applying, and also the local laws are applying. IHL does not apply in this context right now. The gangs are not recognized as armed groups, even though they can combine. Well, they have concerted attack, coordinated attack, and they attacked the governments very recently. So, which changed a little bit the analysis that we had about the situation. It's still not reaching the threshold of a non-international armed conflict. So it means that because we are at the beginning of a humanitarian response within a violence context, should I say, we need to work very, very hard on acceptance and access strategies. We need to promote the 4 basic principles, which are humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. This is not super obvious neither. We need to also try to negotiate and to be accepted, to avoid having armed escort when we are moving around. It is an easy way to think that we are protected to have armed escorts, but we really need to work on our neutrality, and having an armed escort can trigger that and can provoke as well the gangs that are in the area where we are going. So we have to be very careful on the way we work. So yeah, I think the biggest lesson learned from me since I arrived here is that because of the violence context and because IHL does not apply, sometimes we try to reinvent the wheel, but there is no need for that. We can build on the experience of other countries, and we could fast track the implementation of all the mechanisms. I think what will be the most important is to ensure that the local NGOs, our partners, and they are also the primary respondent for many crises, that they are really well informed about all those principles, that they are also very well trained about how to take care of their security. Some of them are, some of them are not. So I think with the localization agenda, I think it's very, very important that we also pass this expertise to them so that they are the one responding.
Thank you, Martine. Yes, and it's good to touch on that point around working with local actors, because it's above all important in conflict-affected countries, isn't it? So our next speaker is Saleh Saeed, Chief Executive of the Disasters Emergency Committee. I'm going to begin by asking you, Saleh, what expertise and unique offering does Action Against Hunger bring to the DEC member agencies?
Sure, thank you, Kate. Perhaps it might be worthwhile me just touching a little bit about who the DEC is, so your participants can understand the organisation. We're an umbrella body of the 15 leading humanitarian organisations who obviously have a base here in the UK. And together we spring into action when there are major global emergencies, and we do that by also having a really great partnership with our colleagues and partners in the media, particularly the likes of BBC, ITV, Sky, and others. And we're governed by the 3 criteria that we have in terms of when we can launch an appeal. And the first one is around the scale of the humanitarian need, and that's always very obvious and easy to assess. The second one is around access. Are we able, or our members with their local partners, able to actually scale up the humanitarian response, which is not always as easy as it sounds, as we've just heard from Martine. And the third one is around really public awareness. Is there a good chance that a nationally coordinated appeal with the involvement in the media will be successful in terms of public sympathy and awareness? And all 3 have to align in order for us to launch an appeal. We're not a government body, we are an independent charity, and each of our member CEOs actually sit on our board, with the chair coming as an independent. So that's just a little bit about the DEC. But in response to your question, Kate, look, Action Against Hunger is one of those 15 charities, and each of those charities brings quite a different sort of set of experience and expertise. And Action Against Hunger, without doubt, brings that experience in terms of combating malnutrition in particular. And as the name suggests, in terms of Action Against Hunger, it's obviously a very important player within the Disasters Emergency Committee. And we all know that crises affect food security and nutrition in many different contexts. Floods, for example, where crops are destroyed, causing outbreaks in disease such as cholera. Conflicts, of course, also disrupt food supplies, as we're seeing currently now in Gaza and other places of the world. And finally, a drought, which means a drastic reduction in food production. These are all contexts where, of course, we're seeing severe food insecurity and hunger. And what I'm continuously shocked by the levels of food insecurity, and we know now close to 1 in 10 people globally go to bed hungry at night. This is a shocking figure. A figure that obviously should not really exist given the wealth of the world that we live in. But focusing on Action Against Hunger's unique expertise, no matter what the cause of malnutrition, Action Against Hunger is there to support the DEC in our appeals, often responding with scientific-based responses around food insecurity, water and sanitation, health, and particularly also mental health in terms of fighting malnutrition. All these are very valuable. And one of the great things I like about Action Against Hunger, particularly working in DEC context, is about working in a very holistic approach. There are many causes to hunger, and we need to obviously try to ensure that we all work together in those areas. You know, I just want to add that Action Against Hunger is a real asset to the DEC, as well as so many other organisations that we work with, and being able to focus on an area of expertise, such as, for example, hunger and malnutrition, alongside organisations like Age International, who focus on the elderly, Save the Children, who focus, of course, on children, as it says, is a really good way of collaboration and working together to address people's needs. Just want to share a few examples, if that's okay, Kate. So the first one I want to share with you is in Pakistan, which DEC launched an appeal for 2 or 3 years ago, as in response to those terrible floods that some of your participants might recall. So Action Against Hunger was able to help teach farmers about climate smart growing techniques, so the next time the floods hit their area, they're much more resilient, both in terms of as people, as communities, but also in terms of the seeds and the techniques they use, so the crops become hardy, if you like, to better survive those extreme weather conditions. In Afghanistan, Action Against Hunger was able to improve access to health and nutrition services for vulnerable people living in very remote areas, who often have no access or very remote access to local healthcare systems. And finally, in Ukraine, Action Against Hunger provided mental health support to young mothers to prevent malnutrition, as research shows that maternal depression often leads to low child immunization rates and reduced hospital visits and decrease in breastfeeding. So those are just a few examples of the kind of work that I know that Action Against Hunger has been delivering and excelling in, whilst working within the DEC fold, if you like. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Sally. Yeah, and it's also, I should add to that, I know from my side that it's been really invaluable to Action Against Hunger joining the DEC a few years ago, and with all of those crises, the DEC membership and funding enabled Action Against Hunger to really respond much more rapidly and much more flexibly than we would otherwise have been able to. So as a follow-up question to that, around your experiences with the DEC and before, we hear a lot about charitable giving decreasing. What's your experience of this? And in particular, do you see it playing out with a humanitarian crisis response?
So as I mentioned before, you know, we play a unique role in bringing sort of those 15 UK leading charities to launch these joint appeals. And often, of course, well, not often, always on the back of major media attention. We've seen that very recently in Ukraine, and that continues to dominate the news. The devastating earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria, the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, and the floods recently in Pakistan. And all those actually have come at a time in the last sort of 1 to sort of 5 years, if you like, the time where here in the UK we've all been going through the sort of cost of living crisis, as well as COVID, which obviously impacted many people's livelihoods here in the UK. Now, despite that, you know, we've been able to raise an incredible £750 million together as 15 organisations and the DEC. And that, to me, is a testimony of the generosity of course, the public here in the UK, because most of our funding and fundraising is directed at the public. We're, of course, grateful to get support from corporates, trust foundations, and including the UK government through their aid match scheme. But for the public to contribute that level of funding, despite the cost of living crisis, I think demonstrates that there is a huge appetite, if you excuse the bad pun, in terms of people wanting to help, and wanting to help in particular during these big crises where it's evident that people are at a very, very bad level when it comes to hunger, when it comes to safety and security. And we should never take that support for granted, because we never know when the next emergency is around the corner and we're having to yet again knock on people's doors and ask them to support. And it's a time particularly where we're seeing governments around the world actually cut back their funding. As hunger grows, those governments have continued, sadly, to decrease their funding, which means the sort of greater responsibility falls now on hardworking individuals up and down the land. So yeah, huge thanks obviously to everybody that continues to support not only the DEC, but also appeals like Action Against Hunger for currently Gaza and elsewhere around the world. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Saleh. And then just one final question. You mentioned, of course, that you grew up in Yemen, and you've also been back there more recently and visited Action Against Hunger programs, amongst others. So it'd be helpful to hear your reflections on that experience, the situation there.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I was born in Yemen, but have had frequent opportunities to travel with family and for family events or weddings, and also on holiday. So clearly the country has a very special place in my heart. And visiting recently, actually during the conflict, and seeing many of the places that we used to have fun, enjoy, and see people being happy and everything else, and seeing it, I can't say post-war because the conflict sadly continues to dominate the scene in Yemen. And just for your listeners, Yemen is still going through a severe hunger crisis. And the world is sadly seems to have forgotten about that. And that tends to happen where new crisis comes and dominates the landscape, whether it be Ukraine, whether it be Gaza, all of course desperately in need of support in their own right. But when I was visiting Yemen, I saw for myself not only Action Against Hunger's work, but also that of many of our other member charities. And I saw, for example, the activities such as supporting and training mothers better understand how to ensure that they care for children in terms of breastfeeding, nutritional support, and so forth. These are kind of things in an environment where conflicts has ravaged society that people need constantly reminding and support and signposting towards. But also giving grants to female-headed households so that they can start their own mini businesses, little enterprises, so that they're able to earn an income for themselves and their children, which is a real lifesaver. And also seeing, for example, the solar panels being installed on very remote health clinics, essential where those electricity has been cut off because of the conflict. So having solar panels means the clinic can continue to deliver the life saving work. And finally, a very important part of Action Against Hunger's work I heard about, although I sadly didn't see, is the mobile clinics. In Yemen, the health infrastructure is sadly on its knees, and many rural clinics closed down because there was just no logistics to be able to support those clinics. So the mobile clinics were able to go out to those rural communities that had been isolated and cut off and deeply impacted by the conflict, to ensure that those mothers and those children were able to get the nutrition and the support they deserve. And often, sometimes, the most simple of solutions is a real lifesaver. The one for me that is a miracle cure, I call, is this, what we call the plumpy nut paste, which is just a very simple and highly nutritious food given often to children who are malnourished. And these are really a cheap and effective way of saving children's lives before they have to be admitted into those very intensive and very expensive units to save their lives. So an incredible amount of work that I know Action Against Hunger plays in the humanitarian space, and particularly during DEC appeals. And my thanks go out to those incredibly brave aid workers who are often working in very hard conditions during conflict, during drought, and during a flood. And of course, we cannot do the work that we do here in the UK in terms of raising those funds without the excellent work they all deliver. So my huge thanks to everyone involved. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you very much, Saleh. That's really interesting to hear about, and positive to know that there is some, well, there's clearly a lot of good work going on in Yemen, but it must be very painful going back there, having known the place before the conflict. So our final speaker is Huete Hale Selese, who is going to speak to us a bit more about her experiences as a journalist and I'd like to begin by asking you, Hetty, a bit about your background and your time at the BBC.
Thank you so much. I'm someone who's spent 15 years at the BBC World Service, primarily working on African stories for an African audience. And that has just given me an incredible front seat on the news that happened across the continent over this time, but also allowed me to meet so many different people and people from different walks of life. And I'm just incredibly passionate about making sure those stories are adequately reflected in a fair and representative way, and that also we don't only have negative news, that positive news is told somehow as well, which isn't always top of media houses' agendas, as it were.
Thank you. And what drew you to being a trustee at Action Against Hunger?
I think I'm at a time in my career where I want to be giving back and being, it sounds really corny, but being part of the change that I want to see. As I alluded to earlier, I think before I dropped off, I did grow up hearing stories about famine in the country of my parents in Ethiopia, but also traveling back and forth between the UK and Ethiopia, which I did through my teen years. There's a difference between what I saw on the ground and what was necessarily on news media. I wanted to be useful, and the simplicity of what Action Against Hunger does is support Action Against Hunger and the mission.
Yes, well, thank you. It's great. We're really pleased to have you on board as a trustee now.
I think it froze there for a moment.
Sorry, we've got slight connection issues with you, Haweti. Okay, Haweti, I think, has had to drop off for a second. Well, while we wait for her to come back, no, she's back right away. Hi, Haweti, are you back?
I am back, sorry.
You are good. Okay, I thought I was going to turn to others for a second, but that's fine. I wonder if, from all of your very extensive experience of travelling and working as a journalist, can you tell us any particularly memorable stories you have of families or individuals that you've met and reported on, in particularly in kind of hunger crises?
Yeah, very memorable is being on the South Sudanese border in 2014 and meeting the families that had been fleeing overnight from violence into the UNHCR in Ethiopia. And I came away with two really strong things. It was my very first experience as a field producer, my first experience in a refugee camp. And first of all, the refugee camp was actually quite a pleasant place to be. Organized, there were facilities for everything. The residents were neat and bright, and that was really not what I was expecting. So I really came away thinking, if they're well organized and well resourced, refugee camps can be a safe and pleasant place to be. And there's a lot going on as well, along with the kind of disaster management and getting people to feeding centers and the distribution of food. And the second thing was that the women that I met there, and I did meet a lot of women because I think they were drawn to me, and because I was a woman and I was a similar color to them and a similar background. They were so well dressed and so well put together that I was most struck by how similar they were to me. And because these women had had to flee, and I noticed that they were wearing nightgowns, and I worked with the translation, and the stories, we found out that they had literally fled in the middle of the night. They had got up and ran out to flee the attackers, and they had ended up in another country in their pajamas. And I just couldn't get away from that thought that, you know, when you travel, you pack, you get ready, but to actually find yourself somewhere else trying to start a new life, and you're still in the nightgown and your dressing gown and your slippers in another country. And I think the dignity of those people that I met, and just how similar they were to me, they could have been sat next to me on the tube going to work any day of the week. And I think I often think, you know, people in disasters are other people. I really felt, and that was quite striking.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that does really bring it home to you, doesn't it? That just what it must be like for civilians suddenly swept up in a drama that is not of their own making. And through the experiences that you've encountered of people's you've encountered many people's stories worldwide. What kind of insights have we lost Wetty again? Hi, Wetty. Sorry, we lost you for a second there again. I was just asking you.
So sorry, my connection's not great. Go on.
No, that's fine. Is there particular insights that you can share from all of your extensive experience of people meeting in these kinds of crises?
Sounds corny, but they are just like us. Any of us could find ourselves in that situation. And they have the same needs and desires and wishes and hopes for their families that we do. They're no different. And I think that from there kind of comes the collective responsibility that we have to make that change. I think those are the main things that kind of have stayed with me. It's a privilege to have been up close to people living through those really difficult times. And another thing is also the diversity of the news teams that go out, the diversity of the teams that go out and support in those disasters. It really helps if it's not just one group of people, be it women, be it ethnicity, be it religion. It really helps if there's diversity there, just so that we can better support and better tell the stories because we understand them better. That's something that has stayed with me. And people are incredibly resourceful and incredibly brave and, you know, incredibly dignified, but why are they having to go through this and what can I do to make it better? I think those are the things I've come away with. Yeah.
Thank you, Wetty. Yes, that must be inspiring to see as much as it's difficult. And I guess that actually links to the final question that I really wanted to put back to all of our guests for this webinar, or two final questions, in fact, if we have time. So if I can come to you each perhaps briefly on this first question, why do you think it's important that people in the UK respond to and care about rising global hunger? So if I could get a few words from each of you on that in summary, although I think you've all answered it very well already. Perhaps, Johnny, I'll come to you first.
Well, I think it's first and foremost because it's a moral imperative. And actually, it comes back to what Wetty said. You know, the people who are suffering in this way are just like us, could be us, might be one day us. So I think there's a moral imperative, and I think it is unconscionable that in a world with lots of resources, so many people are suffering. But I also think, although that's obviously the main reason why we should act, the unfolding crisis of hunger and malnutrition is also of huge geopolitical significance, which I think politicians are not woken up to. And you know, this vicious cycle of violence and hunger and violence destabilizes the whole world. And if people can't get access to the nutrition they need, if they can't develop cognitively, physically, if they can't get the education they need, if they can't then be part of a productive economy, if they can't feel that they have something to give, you know, they will be prey to people, you know, with guns and with people like that. And the fundamental thing I say to all politicians is a hungry world is never going to be a safe and secure world. So it's in all of our interests that we tackle it.
Thank you, Johnny. Yes, that's a very powerful message. And Martine.
Thank you very much. So yes, indeed, I agree. So I was thinking more or less about the butterfly effect. So some things happen here and it has systematically consequences on everyone. So we are all this in this all together. I think I would like to maybe praise a little bit my colleagues about the work that they are doing, because we can still make a difference. So Action Against Hunger, well, you see me as a country director. I'm a foreigner clearly in Haiti. But I am the only one basically right now to be a foreigner. We have another one that will join soon, but 97% of our colleagues are Asian, and they are making the difference. So, and they are committed to do the difference. We work also with 240 volunteers that are working in the community. They are the one making the difference. They are the one in the talking to them, helping them to change their attitudes. There is way we can cope with malnutrition. There is sometimes it's about knowledge, sometimes it's about how you invest better the income you have, even though that they are smaller. So what you can do, where you can go also for services when you are desperate somehow. So this is all the work that my colleagues and our volunteers are doing. And just to praise the work of those volunteers, keep in mind that 200 volunteers can reach 150 families in a year. So we can definitely make a difference in a situation like Haiti. Thank you.
Thank you, Martine. And then Saleh?
Thank you, Kate. I'll wholeheartedly agree both with Martine and Johnny on the points made. I just want to add, we do have a responsibility in that often the context around hunger because of the climate crisis and because of conflict. And in some shape or form, although we may not contribute to it personally, as a nation here in the UK, we have a lot to answer for in both the climate crisis and conflict around the world. So I think we have a responsibility, both in terms of trying to make the change in that, although the DEC is not an advocacy organization, I certainly support all those organizations out there that try to change the issues that contribute to global hunger. And finally, because we have the power to do so, we've seen with DEC appeals that people working together passionately and with sincerity are able to make a huge difference, whether by raising huge amounts of money or campaigning to change things. And that's why I think we need to continue that. Thank you.
Thank you, Saleh. Yes, that's a good reminder as well of the need to think about what we should be doing to prevent these crises escalating, not just responding to them. And finally, Hweti, on that question. Hweti, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you, yes.
Yes.
I have to just agree with what everyone has said so far. And I think it's really that thing about them and us. I don't think there is a them and us, it's all us. And the second thing, corny, but I really believe it and hold it to heart, is there is no such thing as other people's children. And therefore we are responsible to make sure that the world is fed and safe. And that benefits all of us.
Thank you, Hweti. Yes, that's very well expressed. So we've got just a couple of minutes left, and I had one final question for you all, but of course we don't have long. So I wonder if I could just ask you in a sentence or so to say, if you have one key takeaway message from this webinar that you would like the audience to take away, what would that be? And maybe to mix things up, I'll go to Saleh. I'll go to you first.
I've got 3 words: collaboration, collaboration, and early intervention. That's it for me.
Thank you, Saleh. And Martine?
Thank you very much. I would say that to see you online right now, it's my takeaway, and I'm not giving it to you, I'm keeping for myself. So my takeaway is that if you are listening right now, it means that we are not alone in Port-au-Prince. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Martine. And Johnny?
I think I'd just reflect what Saleh and Martine and a number of others have said. We know how to make a difference. Action Against Hunger is making a difference. And basically, we know what to do. We know how to do it. We need the resources. Action Against Hunger has the will, but we need the resources and we need the will of others to make sure that we really go forward and make continuing progress that we've made in the past 20 to 30 years.
Thank you, Johnny. And finally, Hweti, we'll come to you. If we can. Hweti, are you able to answer the final question?
Yeah. I would say we should be as kind as we can. Any of us could be in need of the support that we're talking about today. It could happen to any of us. And I think the current economic climate has kind of highlighted that for me. It could happen to any of us. Any of us could be in need. So let's be as kind as we can.
Thank you, Hetty. Yeah, that's a very powerful closing message. It's been really positive actually hearing, because I guess from my perspective, I'm often just working on the big trends in rising global hunger, and it's quite a bleak picture, and it's nice to be reminded of actually the positive work that's being done is mitigating some of the worst impacts on the most vulnerable families. So thank you all so much for taking the time to join this webinar. We are rather out of time now, but it may be that we get some messages and follow up that we questions from the audience that we can share with you afterwards and get back to them on. But yeah, I just wanted to wrap up there really by saying thanks so much. I found that really insightful and positive, as well as kind of dark in places to hear from you all. And I am sure I will be in touch with you all again soon.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.